So writing programs that use inheritance is actually a fairly hard problem in my experience. There's actually some aspects to designing things to think about. What I wanted to do is just briefly talk about some issues that you might consider if you're writing code that uses inheritance. To do that, I want to focus on this table printing class and this print table function that I wrote earlier. One of the things you might think about is just the relationship between these two things. I have this print table function, which uses a formatter. I have a table formatter class, which serves as a base class. One of the things that you could ask, what is the proper relationship between those two pieces of functionality? For example, one of the things that somebody might consider is taking this print table function and making it a method on the class. Maybe the idea is you would take that function, move it into the class definition, and then maybe doing something like this. So what I'm going to do is have a print table method where instead of taking a formatter, I call methods on myself. A slight change in focus here. So what I've got is I have a base class, table formatter, and I took that function above and I just moved it into the class. Here's how that would work, by the way. If you decided to do that, you would import table. You would make a formatter, like you would say formatter is equal to table text table formatter, like that. And then you would use that to drive the printing. And then I would give it maybe my stock portfolio that I had from before, and you would produce output. This is one choice that you might make in a class. Now the question is that a good idea or not? I think it kind of depends on the problem. In this case, I'm not really so hot on doing this. One of the things that's a little bit weird about it is that this print table method, it's actually very special purpose, actually. I mean, it's like you give me a bunch of objects and some column names, and it prints those out. I could imagine tables coming from many different places that are not that. Or I could imagine generating tables in different formats that are not at all driven in that way. As an example of that, in one of the very first things that we did in the course, I wrote a mortgage calculator. You've probably long forgot about the mortgage calculator program, but one of the things that program did is it made a table. You might remember that. I mean, I have these functions for making a table where you would run it and you got this schedule of output that it produced. Okay, so that it produced something like that. Maybe I want to change that code to use my table format. I'm not going to do that right now, but hypothetically, maybe I would change the code. That would be a little bit strange. It's like that mortgage table thing has nothing whatsoever to do with this print table function. So you could ask, why is print table even here? I don't know whether I like that. In terms of designing the code, maybe I want to have the functionality kind of decoupled a little bit. I don't like the idea of having a very specific implementation kind of just bolted in there like that. That's one thought. Another thought that you might consider is maybe the table printer should be its own class altogether. You could make a class table printer that maybe takes in a formatter. You give me a formatter, and then what I do is I move this function in as a method. Okay, so I'm going to take this code, kind of move it in as a method of this class. The code is starting to look very enterprise ready at this point. So what you're doing is you've pulled that print table in as a method, and then I'm going to drive a formatter on that. So I've got a class, you give me a formatter, then I do print table. How that is going to work is really this. What you would do is you would say import table. What you would have to do is make the formatter first. So you would make a formatter, and then you would make a printer object. Here's a table printer, and then as an argument to that, you would provide the formatter, and then you would say printer print table. Like that. Okay, so what's happening here is you're introducing a lot of plumbing, if you will. You have connections between objects. Again, you have a printer object where you give it a formatter object, and then that is now a method on that. That works, although I'm not super happy with that code either. I mean, one thing to think about is that this class, table printer, if it only has one method, print table, maybe it's better served by just having a function. This print table code, it's a lot smaller, basically accomplishes the same thing. Maybe I would prefer to kind of keep that around. Again, it really depends on the problem that you're solving, but as a general rule in Python, you do want to think about the plumbing between objects and maybe trying to avoid excessive complexity. Right now, this table printer class, it works, but it does feel sort of very verbose, maybe kind of unnecessary. I mean, if there were other methods that got added to that, I would consider keeping it as a class. But as is, I have to admit I kind of like the print table function. Think about these things as you write larger code.